The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. At that time, Jesus went to a city called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the city, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." And he came and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And he gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report concerning him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. The Gospel of the Lord. Today we have two beautiful stories of two sons being raised from the dead. Two beautiful stories of two sons and two widows. When we hear of Jesus raising the young man from the dead, in a way we expect it. After all, Jesus is the Son of God. But in the Old Testament, Elijah raising a boy from the dead, wow, he was just a man. And it shows the incredible faith that he had and his deep prayer and trust in God. A few years ago, my sister gave a book to my father for his birthday present. And it was a book about many saints raising people from the dead over the centuries, in fact, over the last 2,000 years. And in this book, there are over 400 well-documented cases. That's quite amazing. There's at least one saint you'll know, probably more than just one, but St. Anthony of Padua. Apparently there was a boy who drowned in a river, and St. Anthony raised him from the dead. There are many such interesting stories. So my question to you today, if so many saints have raised people from the dead, have you? If you have, please put your hand up. No, it can't only just be me. You're not serious. I've raised thousands of people from the dead. You know, we fear the physical death, but sometimes we forget about the spiritual death. You know, those people who come to me to celebrate the sacrament of confession with serious sins on their conscience, they are raised from the dead, from spiritual death. And it's much more important to be raised from that death than the physical death. You know, I often think about poor Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead. You know, he had to die twice. And his second death He was murdered because the scribes and the Pharisees were jealous that so many people were coming to believe in Jesus because of him. Now, in the book of Revelation, it speaks about the second death. It's not referring to the second death of Lazarus, or not that kind of death, but actually means a spiritual death that a person would experience if they go to hell, dying in their soul. Now, the beauty of the sacrament of confession is it raises people from that death. It saves them from that second death. Confession is so often misunderstood, and yet it is such a beautiful sacrament. In that sacrament, we benefit directly from the fruits that Jesus won for us on the cross. And he gives us all a second chance. Without it, we'd all be in serious trouble, at least I would be. Now, there was a true story recounted by the great Archbishop Fulton Sheen. And it was on a Saturday afternoon, like here, when I hear confessions before the Mass. This priest was hearing confessions before Mass, and there were quite a few people that Saturday coming. And then there was this very big, strong man. He was a lumberjack, so he was used to chopping down big trees. And he hadn't been to confession for a very long time, for quite a few years. And he decided, today is the day I'd better go. And so eventually it's his turn, and he steps into the confessional and he says, "Father, please, let's just save time. I've committed every sin in the book. Now just please give me a penance and absolution." And so the priest looks at him a bit startled and said, "Have you committed murder?" And the man says, "Actually, come to think of it, I haven't." And the priest said, "Well, please then go out of the confessional, kneel down, look towards Jesus on the crucifix, and make a proper examination of conscience, and then come back and confess your sins." So the man steps out of the confessional and he shouts to the rest of the people in the church, "It's no use coming to confession today, he's only hearing murder cases today." It's Jesus' natural will to save us from death, to heal us in every way that we need healing. And if you think about it, all of the 7 sacraments, in one way or another, heal us and save us from death. So I'd like to just briefly give some accounts of how, in my short experience as a priest, I've witnessed the saving power of Jesus through all the different sacraments. I was serving in a parish in Pretoria, St. Pius X, and I got a phone call from some very distressed parents. The lady had given birth to a very premature baby, whom they named William. Apparently he was born only 500 grams. It's half a kilogram, can you imagine? And of course, because he was so tiny, they had him in intensive care in an incubator. And the normal procedure was they would have to keep him there for as long as it was necessary until he gained enough weight and until he could at least breathe by himself. So the parents were very worried and said, "Please, Father, come and baptize our baby." And so I did. And the amazing thing, the moment he was baptized, he rapidly started gaining good health and strength and growing until he was able to be released from the intensive care. Some of you may remember that I served here 10 years ago for a few months And after that, I got the boot and was sent to the northern parts of Sebokeng, where I served a parish called Saint Benedict the Black. He was a very good Franciscan. Anyway, as was my custom and habit, I was hearing confessions before Mass. And this woman came in to make her confession. She finished confessing her sins, and I started giving the counsel and advice. And as I did so, she started coughing, snorting, spitting and choking, convulsing, and I realized this poor woman is possessed. So I pretended that everything is just normal and carried on with the prayers, gave the absolution. By the time I gave the sign of the cross, she was completely healed and completely back to normal. It's so wonderful to see the power of Christ working through the sacraments. Then the year that I joined the Franciscans, which was 1991, so you can kind of work out my age by now. The first year that you join the Franciscans, you call it the year of the postulancy. And at that time, the postulancy house was up on the north coast in KwaZulu-Natal, near Eshowe, Umtumzini and Richards Bay, and some of those beautiful places. And 9 months into the year, I made very good friends with one of the other young men who had joined. And unfortunately, he did have his problems. And one night, it was probably like 11:30 at night, close to midnight, I suddenly heard these groans coming from his room. He was a few rooms down the passage on the opposite side. And I'm still a very light sleeper, so I wake up for anything. So I got up and went to go and see what's going on. And I was filled with horror when I looked inside his room. There he was, the silly man had cut his wrists and he had drank ant poison. So I immediately went and called the senior priest. He was Monsignor Marius Banks, a very good man. He had actually served as a navigator in the Royal Air Force in World War II. So he was a very practical man with practical wisdom. So we bound up his wrists with some bandages very tightly. And we got a glass of water and filled it half with salt and stirred it vigorously and forced him to drink this. And then fortunately vomited out all of the poison. But for the next week, his throat was so sore and burnt from this poison, he couldn't eat a thing. It would just cause him so much pain. Then at last, the man got some good sense into his head, and he went and he made a good confession. And that Sunday morning, he went to Mass. Then he told me after the Mass, the moment he received Holy Communion, he felt this incredible warmth and healing just go throughout his throat and his neck. From that moment, he was perfectly cured and could once again eat normal solid foods. That's the power of Jesus working through the sacraments. I was serving the Holy Family Parish in Durban, and I got a phone call from a very distressed young woman. She was a young married lady. She had 2 children, maybe 5 years and 8 years old. She said, "Father, please come over. My husband has just been diagnosed with cancer of the throat. And apparently that's one of the most aggressive and fast advancing cancers that you get." In my own experience, I did some nursing for a year. I nursed a man who had cancer of the throat. And unfortunately, it was really dreadful, and I really felt sorry for the way the man was suffering. So I went over to this family. I prayed and anointed the man, gave him the sacrament of the sick. And more than that, this man really had a good wife. She prayed and fasted for him for at least a week just on water. Then about 2.5 months later, she phones me, and I could hear the note of joy in her voice. She said, "Father, please, you're going to come and celebrate with us. My husband's just come back from the doctor, and the doctor said they cannot find any trace of the cancer. It's all gone." Again, the power of Christ working through the sacraments. Again, I was serving in St. Pius X parish in Pretoria. I got a phone call in the evening. It said, "Father, please, you've got to come as fast as possible to Nazareth House. There's this 91-year-old woman, she's on her deathbed. Please come and give her the last rites." So I went as fast as possible, but by the time I got there, I arrived, the family was standing around and the nurses were standing there, and she was lying there still, and I said, "Father, sorry, she's already stopped breathing for about 20 minutes. Her body was still warm, so I anointed her with the sacrament of the sick. And they said to me, "Father, she had actually been preparing to become a Catholic and preparing for her confirmation. Please, won't you confirm her as well?" So I said, "Yes, of course." So I confirmed her and then consoled the family as much as I could and went home. Then the next morning I thought, well, the very least is I can still make the confirmation certificate and at least give it to her family. And surely it would console them and be of great meaning to them. So the next morning I went back over to Nazareth House. When I arrived in the room of this 91-year-old lady, there she was sitting in her lazy boy chair, upright, busy painting her nails with red nail varnish. I was totally flabbergasted. Then in the sacraments of marriage and orders, these two sacraments dispose us towards receiving the other sacraments. Just think about it. If there was no priesthood, there would be no sacraments. If there was no marriage, there'd be no priesthood. Priests are born from good Christian families, from good Christian spouses. From all of these experiences, I understand and believe that that healing is Jesus' natural will for us, for each and every one of us. But then a question may arise in your minds. What about those people who pray so fervently for so long and still do not experience healing, at least not in the way that they expect to or want to? For those people, I believe Jesus has another and a greater plan. For example, in the life of Saint Clare of Assisi, she had a great gift for healing people. There were many people who came to her and experienced miracles of healing. And apparently, on the day that she was canonized, named a saint, at least 19 recorded miracles were read out in her memory. The funny thing is that Saint Clare herself was a very sickly person. And for the last 25 years of her life, she really was very sick, to the point of being bedridden for lengths of time. And I believe God allowed her to experience the sickness because it gave her another gift. That is the great gift of compassion for reaching out to those who came to her in need. And it's because St. Clare was bedridden that she became the patron saint of television. It was either Christmas or Easter, I can't remember which, but she desperately wanted to go to Mass, but she couldn't because she was just so sick and in bed. And so Jesus gave her favor, and he allowed her to see a vision of the Mass as it was being celebrated from the beginning to the end of it. And so that's how she became patron saint of television. Very difficult patronage to have. Then there was a story which I read. It was a book written by a mystic, and he recounted episodes in the life of Jesus, and some of them not even recorded in the Gospels. Whether they were true or not, I don't know, and for me it's actually not really that important. But all of these stories were in harmony with the Gospel, and there was a resounding echo of, yes, this is the Jesus that I know, and it's just like him. So apparently in a certain village, there was a young girl who had been paralyzed for a few years. And because of her paralysis, she had gone into a very deep depression. She was troubled and distressed and anxious. And when the people heard that Jesus was coming to their village, they knew that he had a reputation for mercy and the gift of healing. They got all excited and went running to Jesus and said, "Please, come and heal this young girl. She's been paralyzed for so long." So Jesus went over to the young girl. He prayed with her, laid his hand on her. And the amazing thing, to everyone's expectation, they were expecting to see her to get up and start walking, but she didn't. She remained paralyzed. But after that experience of meeting Jesus, they saw something else that took place. She was completely healed in her spirit, completely healed in her emotions, to the point that she became so joyful and radiant. She became so joyful, she began to sing a lot. She began to sing about the gospel and about Jesus. And she sang so beautifully that many people began to flock around her to hear her sing. And in this way, they would hear the gospel and come to know about Jesus and believe in him. And so if you, in your own experience, or if you know somebody who for a long time has not experienced healing, then we can ask ourselves the question, what is it that Jesus is calling me to do? What special gift has Jesus given to me that he has not given to others? St. Paul said, "The suffering that I experience is to complete what is lacking in the body of Christ." So one thing that we can do is we can offer our suffering as a prayer to Jesus for the conversion of sinners, for the salvation of souls, for building up God's kingdom. These are very powerful prayers because through our own suffering, we share with Jesus in his own suffering. These prayers are very powerful. One last experience that I'd like to share: when I was serving in the parish in Pretoria, there was a young man people had asked me to come and pray for. He was apparently possessed, and it was a very difficult case, so we didn't seem to get very far that day. And I thought, what can we do? Then I remembered there was this elderly lady in the parish who had been very sick and bedridden for at least 5 years. So I went to her and I said, "Please, I need a favor from you. I would like you to pray and offer your sufferings to Jesus for the healing of a certain young man. And I didn't even explain any of the details to her. So she said, yes, of course I'll do that. The very next day, this young man was totally healed and delivered. That is the power of this kind of prayer. And so it is, I believe, that St. John of the Cross could say, suffering for God is better than working miracles. And so don't waste your suffering.